I found out my parents are hiding me from guests because they are ashamed of my limp. What am I supposed to do now? Hi. My name is Lindsay, I'm 25, and I live with my parents, Joanna and Richard. I should say right away that I'm not some carefree girl who just doesn't want to move out. I have a physical disability that affects my mobility. It's nothing critical. I can walk, work, and lead a normal life, but I have a pretty noticeable limp, and sometimes, when my leg is really tired or hurts, I have to use a crutch. I am a kind, calm person. I work remotely as a graphic designer. I don't cause problems, and in fact, I try to help them around the house as much as possible, given my situation. It might not seem like a big deal, but for my parents, especially my mom, Joanna, it's simply a mark of shame. They've never said it directly, but their shame has always hovered in the air like a corrosive fog. This didn't start yesterday. Since childhood, when we went to shopping malls or some events, Mom always tried to walk slightly ahead or slightly behind so that my limp wouldn't be so obvious. If some acquaintances asked about my leg, her face would immediately turn to stone, and she would answer something dry, like, "Yes, a minor nerve issue, nothing serious," and immediately change the subject. I saw all of this. I felt that awkward, almost repulsive look they would cast on me when they thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. Always. It wasn't anger or spite, but precisely shame. As if I wasn't their daughter, but some failure of theirs that had to be hidden as much as possible to maintain the perfect family facade. I always tried to ignore it, telling myself they were just worried, that it was their way of dealing with my condition. But the older I got, the more I felt them distancing themselves. They loved to boast about my brother, Jason, who lives in another state. He's a successful lawyer. He has his own apartment, a perfect wife, 2 kids, in short, the ideal showcase. My remote income, my successes in design, my calm demeanor, and my independence, to the extent my situation allows, all of this was just background noise. They needed something they could show off. And I, with my hobbling gait, simply didn't fit into their worldview. I always swallowed the hurt. Always. I thought it was easier that way. Easier for them, easier for me. But last week, something happened that finally broke me. Something that ripped out all my patience and calm. My mom's best friend's parents, Martha and George, were coming to visit us. They live in another city, and this was their first visit in 3 years. They have a large, influential family, they constantly travel, and Mom was trying very hard to impress them. Spring cleaning, an expensive tablecloth, new curtains, all to show that everything was perfect with us. 2 days before they arrived, as I was sitting quietly in my room at my computer, working on an urgent project, I overheard their conversation. The door was slightly ajar. Mom was talking to Dad, Richard, on the phone. "No, Richard, you don't understand. They'll arrive Saturday morning and won't leave until Sunday evening. Lindsay can't just sit in her room for 2 days. What if she wants to come out to the kitchen? Or the bathroom? They'll see her. George and Martha, they'll immediately notice the limp. It'll be so awkward, Richard. Just awkward." I felt an icy chill run down my spine, and a lump caught in my throat. I knew they were embarrassed by me, but to this extent. Dad mumbled something indistinct that, judging by Mom's tone, sounded like an attempt to calm her down or suggest some compromise. Mom continued, more harshly, "No compromises. She has to disappear. Say she went to a friend's for the weekend, that she's sick, it doesn't matter. But she must not be here. Hide her, Richard. We can't risk it. We need everything to go perfectly. Hide her." As if I wasn't their 25-year-old daughter, but some broken piece of furniture that needed to be put away in the closet until the guests left. Until they stopped seeing this flaw in their perfect home. I sat in my chair, listening to every rustle, and felt my heart clench and pound in my chest. Tears didn't fall, just some kind of internal rupture that made my breathing shallow. The next day, Dad came up to me, and with a face that expressed a mixture of guilt and discomfort, he suggested, "Hey, Lindsay. How about spending the weekend at Emily's? You haven't seen each other in a while, right?" A change of scenery, a rest. He wouldn't look me in the eyes. He knew what he was doing, and I knew that he knew. I just nodded, not saying a word. I couldn't. If I had opened my mouth, a scream or a flood of accusations would have erupted from me. And I didn't want to give them that. Not now. That's why I'm here. Now I know for sure, they are not just uncomfortable, they are ashamed, they are ready to hide me. To hide their own child. This is not just hurt. This is betrayal. And now I have to decide what to do next. How to live under the same roof with people for whom I am their greatest shame. I feel like this has to end. And it will. But how? They hid me away, but the silence is crushing me. I found something in my mom's desk, and now I can't breathe. I spent that weekend at Emily's, my friend since college. She lives about an hour away, and it was a strategic decision to stay with her. I knew my parents would think I was being agreeable, compliant, just the good, quiet daughter they want me to be. I didn't tell Emily the real reason I was there. I just said my parents had some important, high-pressure guests over, and I needed a break from the chaos and noise so I could focus on my design work. It was a lie, but a necessary one to maintain a semblance of control over my own humiliation. Emily is great. She noticed I was unusually quiet, that my eyes were constantly distant, but she didn't pry. That's her best quality. She gives you space until you're ready to talk. I tried to work, I really did, but the sight of my laptop screen just blurred. Every time I looked out the window, all I could see was my parents' house, and the thought that at that very moment, Martha and George were probably sitting in our living room, sipping coffee, while my mother, Joanna, was beaming, presenting her perfectly curated life, a life without me. It was sickening. The phrase, "hide her, Richard," just played on repeat in my head. It wasn't the act of asking me to leave that hurt the most. It was the raw, unadulterated shame in my mother's voice, the demand to make me vanish. It made every previous instance of their discomfort flood back, the rushed exits from public places, the quick hand signals for me to sit down if they saw an acquaintance coming, the way they never introduced me to anyone new until they absolutely had to. It wasn't about protecting me from pity, it was about protecting their image from my disability. When I finally got back home late on Sunday evening, Martha and George had already left. The house was too quiet, almost sterile. Dad, Richard, was in the garage doing something with tools, a typical retreat for him after any stressful social event. Mom was in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless granite counters. She looked relieved, almost giddy with the success of her performance. "Oh, Lindsay, you're back. How was Emily's? Did you have a nice break?" She chirped, her tone overly bright, completely fake. I looked straight at her. I needed to see if she would acknowledge the elephant in the room, if there would be even a flicker of guilt or apology. "It was fine, Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Did the weekend go perfectly, just like you planned?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. That's Joanna's trick. She keeps the smile on, but the rest of her face is a warning. "Yes, absolutely wonderful." Martha and George were so impressed with the house and everything. They said the dinner was superb. It was such a great time, truly. She didn't bite. She acted as if my question was just a simple inquiry, completely ignoring the underlying accusation. It was the total lack of remorse that was the real punch to the gut. She genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. She had simply managed a potential risk. "Good," I said, and just walked away, straight to my room, closing the door softly. I didn't want a scene. Not yet. I needed information first. I needed something solid, something undeniable that went beyond a phone conversation I overheard. The next few days were a strange kind of Cold War. We lived under the same roof, but we barely spoke. My parents tried to overcompensate by being overly kind. Dad brought me my favorite coffee on Tuesday morning. Mom asked me if I wanted to go clothes shopping on Wednesday. It felt like a bribe, a clumsy attempt to pay me off for my silence and absence. I politely refused everything. I spent most of my time in my room, not working, but thinking. I started watching them, observing their interactions, trying to find a weak spot. It was like living with strangers. Then, on Thursday afternoon, Mom went out for her weekly bridge game, and Dad was still at work. The house was empty. A voice in my head, the one that usually tells me to be calm and reasonable, screamed at me to find something. I knew where Mom kept the important family documents, bills, and tax papers, a locked drawer in her antique desk in the study. She never let anyone touch that desk. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. This felt incredibly invasive, but the desperation outweighed my morals. I went into the study. The drawer was, as always, locked. But I remembered seeing a small, old, brass key hidden inside a ceramic vase on a shelf next to the desk. I don't know why I remembered that, but I did. I pulled it out, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The lock clicked open. Inside, among the organized piles of bills and statements, I found a thin, white envelope, labeled simply J.L. Medical. It wasn't about me, it was about my brother, Jason. I pulled out the papers. They weren't recent. They were old medical bills from about 15 years ago, but what was attached to them was a typed, confidential letter from a specialist doctor. It wasn't Jason's file. It was my file. But it was labeled Jason L. The initials were right, Jason, and I share the same first initial for our middle name, but the file was clearly mine. It detailed my specific congenital nerve and bone condition, the one causing my limp, and it had been completely relabeled under Jason's name. And then I saw the date of the letter. It was right before a major family gathering years ago, when relatives from Europe were visiting. It was a specialist's confirmation of my condition, information Mom had clearly intended to share, but under the guise of it being Jason's minor health issue, something he had supposedly overcome. The letter essentially minimized the severity. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just that they were ashamed of me now, they had been actively managing and minimizing my disability for years, literally erasing my name from my own medical history and giving my condition to the successful, perfect son. So their story of family hardship would be more palatable and easier to distance themselves from. I wasn't just a secret. I was a rewritten narrative. The paper trembled in my hand. This was much, much worse than I ever imagined. The next 48 hours after I found that envelope were a complete blur of cold fury and disbelief. I had locked the drawer, placed the key back in the ceramic vase, and returned to my room, clutching the damning letter. It wasn't just a fleeting, panicked decision to hide me for a weekend. This was a deep-rooted, calculated attempt to control the family narrative. They literally tried to give my physical flaw to their perfect son, making it a footnote in his life instead of a defining part of mine. It was a level of emotional manipulation that made the recent hiding incident seem almost trivial. I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the document, the formal language of the specialist contrasting sharply with the handwritten initials, J.L., scrawled over my name, Lindsay. They had tried to erase the visible part of me and replace it with a less inconvenient version of reality. Friday came, and I was a ghost. I didn't work. I didn't eat. I just waited. I knew I couldn't go on like this, living a lie under their roof, knowing they were this manipulative. I needed a confrontation, not a polite conversation, but a harsh, brutal unveiling of the truth. My father, Richard, came home late, exhausted. He barely noticed my distant silence. He's always been the passive accomplice, the one who carries out Mom's orders while trying to look slightly pained about it. But Mom, Joanna, she noticed. She kept giving me those quick, sharp glances across the dinner table, the kind that are meant to check if you're still under control. She tried to make small talk, asking about my deadlines and if I needed any groceries. Every word was a razor blade. I let her finish washing the dishes, and then, as she was wiping down the kitchen counter, the same counter she was cleaning when she was basking in the glory of my absence, I pulled the letter out of my back pocket and slapped it down hard on the pristine granite surface. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet kitchen. She stopped wiping. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at the paper. Her eyes scanned the official letterhead, the medical terminology, and then the handwritten initials, J.L. Her entire body stiffened. The towel in her hand froze mid-swipe. "What is this, Lindsay?" she asked, her voice dangerously low, stripped of all its cheerful, fake sweetness. It was the voice of a general who had just discovered a breach in her defenses. "Don't play games, Mom," I said, my own voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. The adrenaline was surging through me, a mix of fear and righteous anger. That's my medical file. The official one. The one you relabeled with Jason's initials years ago before the extended family reunion. You changed my name to my brother's because you couldn't handle telling Aunt Carol or Grandpa George that your daughter has a limp. I pointed a trembling finger at the initials. Tell me I'm wrong, Joanna. Tell me you didn't literally erase me from my own medical history just to make your life easier. Just to protect your precious image. She didn't deny it. She just stared at the paper, and then finally, she met my eyes. And what I saw wasn't guilt or shame, it was pure, unadulterated frustration. You went through my desk, she stated, not a question, but an accusation. She was deflecting, trying to shift the focus onto my betrayal of her privacy, rather than her betrayal of me. You hid your own child from guests, Mom. You wanted me to disappear. My privacy is the least of the issues here, I shot back, louder now, my voice echoing slightly in the empty dining room. She took a deep, deliberate breath, visibly composing herself. This was the moment she always flips the script. It wasn't about being ashamed of you, Lindsay. It was about controlling the narrative. When people see you, when they see the limp, they immediately jump to pity. They see a tragedy. Do you really think I wanted those judgmental busybodies making sad faces at you all evening? I was trying to protect you from their pity, from their stupid questions. It was a brilliant lie, packaged with just enough maternal concern to almost make me doubt myself. But I held the paper in my hand. You weren't protecting me, Mom. You were protecting yourselves. If you were protecting me, you would be proud of how hard I worked despite the challenges. You would introduce me and let them see who I am. Instead, you put my condition on Jason because it's easier to swallow a minor issue that happened to the perfect, absent son than it is to deal with the reality of the daughter who is right here, who is always going to have a limp. That's unfair, she cried, finally raising her voice, her composed facade cracking. We have sacrificed so much for you. All those doctors, all the physical therapy. This house, this life, it's all so you can be comfortable and independent. The money card. They always pull the money card. And you expect me to pay for that comfort with my dignity? With my silence? You want me to be eternally grateful that you housed and fed the disabled child you're too embarrassed to acknowledge in public. I felt the tears finally come, hot and angry, but I wiped them away instantly. I wouldn't cry in front of her. The argument lasted another 10 minutes, a brutal exchange where she kept insisting she did it out of love and protection, and I kept bringing it back to the shame and the hiding. Eventually, she picked up the dishcloth again, her face a mask of wounded martyrdom. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain the hiding incident again. She simply said, in a cold, final tone, "Go to your room, Lindsay. We are not discussing this again. You are making a mountain out of a molehill. You have a comfortable life. Don't ruin it with this ridiculous paranoia." I didn't move. I just stood there, the letter still on the counter between us, a monument to their betrayal. I finally picked it up. "This comfortable life is over, Mom," I whispered and walked out. Now, it's Saturday. The tension in the house is unbearable. She hasn't spoken a single word to me since. Dad is staying out, probably avoiding the fallout. I'm locked in my room, not just physically, but emotionally. I have to leave. I know I do. But I have no savings, not enough for a down payment or first month's rent, because most of my remote income goes into paying off my student loans and the expensive specialized orthotics they insisted on. They know I'm trapped. And I know they know. I'm trapped. I needed money to escape, so I checked my savings account. It was empty. My parents did something unspeakable with my life insurance money. The suffocating silence that settled over the house after my confrontation with Mom was worse than any screaming match. It was a calculated, disciplinary silence designed to freeze me out, to force me back into the obedient daughter role. For 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, we existed in parallel universes. Mom would only communicate with Dad in hushed tones, strategically loud enough for me to hear them discussing mundane, perfect family things, completely omitting my existence. Richard, my father, was like a walking shadow, avoiding eye contact, clearly stressed by the rift, but completely unwilling to take a side or, God forbid, intervene. He just let the silence happen. I spent those days focused entirely on one mission: escape. The emotional realization that my parents viewed me as a liability they needed to manage and hide, compounded by the concrete proof of the medical file swap, meant I could not stay here. It wasn't a home. It was a prison where my dignity was the price of entry. I work, yes, but my salary, as I mentioned, is mostly eaten up by student loan payments and the high cost of my custom orthotics, the ones Mom always insisted on being the best, the most expensive, but which they made me pay for out of my earnings as soon as I started working full-time. I had been diligently setting aside a small amount every month for the past 2 years, saving for a deposit on a small apartment. It was slow going, but I had calculated that by early next year, I would finally have enough for a modest place. I sat down at my desk on Monday morning, pulling up my bank's website. My heart was pounding, not just from the tension, but from the sudden, cold fear that maybe I hadn't saved as much as I thought. I logged in, navigated to my savings account, and stared at the balance. My breath hitched. The number was wrong. Terribly wrong. It wasn't the roughly $12,000 I was expecting. It was $0. $0. 00. For a moment, I thought it was a technical error, a glitch. I refreshed the page. The same zeros stared back. I checked the transaction history for the last 3 weeks. There it was, a single, large, outgoing transfer 2 weeks ago, labeled simply, A.C. transfer, J.R., capital. The amount was exactly the full savings balance, plus the small amount I had in my checking account above what I needed for monthly bills. Every last cent I had saved over 2 years gone. I felt dizzy. I hadn't authorized this. I hadn't even looked at my savings account recently, trusting that small, automatic transfers were happening every month. Who had done this? The account was in my name, but my parents, specifically my mother, Joanna, had always had access to everything, claiming it was easier for tax filing and emergencies. I had given her that trust blindly, the way a child does. I didn't scream. I just stood up, my limp suddenly feeling heavier, more pronounced. I walked out of my room and straight into the kitchen, where Mom was sitting at the table, calmly sipping her morning coffee, reading a magazine. I threw my laptop onto the table next to her cup. It landed with a loud, sickening thud. "Where's my money, Mom?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with a controlled fury that felt terrifying even to me. She didn't flinch. She placed her magazine down neatly and looked at the laptop screen, then at me. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a carefully composed look of defensive righteousness. "You mean the money that was in your account, Lindsay? It's been moved." "Moved where?" "To what?" "That was my apartment money. My independence money. You drained my savings." "That's theft, Mom." "It is not theft. It's a restructuring of family assets," she stated, picking up her coffee cup with an unnerving calmness. "You needed a safe, comfortable place to live, didn't you? A place where you wouldn't have to worry about rent or mortgage payments. I need to get out of this house. I need my own life. You know that." I was shouting now, my composure finally shattering. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that cold, conspiratorial tone she used when she wanted to sound rational and superior. "We took the money, Lindsay, and we did something very important with it. We used it to purchase a family annuity in both your father's name and mine. It's a non-transferable asset that will ensure our financial stability in retirement. But there's a key piece to this puzzle." She paused, taking a deliberate sip of coffee, watching my reaction. "You know how we've always paid the yearly premium on your life insurance policy? The one that would pay out to us if anything happened to you? It's a very large policy, very expensive, and we've been paying it for years." I stared at her, unable to form a coherent thought. Where was she going with this? "Well, we were advised by our financial planner that since your father and I have secured our retirement with the annuity, we no longer need the policy's potential payout. So, we changed the beneficiary this week. We made you the sole, irrevocable beneficiary of that entire life insurance policy." I just blinked, the unexpected twist hitting me like a physical blow. The shame of my disability, the hiding, the medical file, and now this, the ultimate, cold-blooded financial maneuver. "What are you saying?" I managed to choke out. It means, she finished, a satisfied, chilling smirk playing on her lips, that if you stay here, safe and sound under our roof, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. But if you try to leave, if you try to take any of our money, which you clearly don't know how to save anyway, you are essentially walking away from financial security. We have replaced your paltry savings with the certainty that if something happens to us, you will be very well taken care of. And, of course, if something happens to you, we are no longer relying on that money for our retirement. It's a clean slate. We took your future independence, but we gave you the guarantee of a safety net that only works if we stay alive and you stay right where you are. She effectively tied my financial freedom to the thread of their own lives and their control. My money was gone, but now I was the beneficiary of a massive life insurance policy, a fact that kept me financially tethered to them in the most horrifying, existential way. I was trapped. Not just by shame, but by money. And the moral dilemma was crushing me. Do I stay for the morbid promise of future security, or do I walk out the door right now with nothing? The last 2 weeks of my life have led to this moment. I'm a prisoner of a life insurance policy. I had to choose between my dignity and financial ruin. I chose the only way out and left the letter on the kitchen counter. The quiet that followed Mom's chilling explanation wasn't silence, it was a deafening roar in my ears. She had successfully turned my life into a sick financial equation. My hard-earned savings were gone, used to secure their retirement, and in return, they had made me the beneficiary of a massive life insurance policy, a financial parachute that only opened if I remained compliant, close, and, morbidly, outlived them. My independence was stolen and replaced with a guaranteed inheritance, a morbid security blanket tied to their continuous control. I looked at her, sitting there, sipping her coffee with the air of a shrewd CEO who had just completed a brilliant, if ruthless, merger. She was smug. She thought she had won. She thought the promise of future money would outweigh the immediacy of my emotional brokenness. "You're wrong, Mom," I managed to say, my voice steady now, cleansed of the earlier hysteria. "You think money is the only thing that matters. You think you can buy my silence and my presence with the promise of a future payout." She simply shrugged, the small movement the ultimate insult. "It's reality, Lindsay. You can't afford to live on your own right now. You just proved you can't manage your savings. This is the smartest, safest option for the long term. Stop being so dramatic." That word, dramatic. It was her ultimate dismissal of my legitimate pain. I didn't argue anymore about the money. I realized that my anger over the funds was secondary to the core issue, their shame and their need for control. They had been trying to hide the limp for 25 years, and now they were using money to ensure the shameful daughter stayed securely locked away, both physically and financially. I turned and walked away. Not to my room, not to pack a suitcase. I walked to the study, unlocked the drawer with the brass key, and pulled out the old medical file, the one with Jason's initials scrawled over my name. I also found the official letter confirming the beneficiary change on the life insurance policy, tucked away in the same folder. It was all there, the full history of their betrayal, both emotional and financial. I returned to the kitchen. Mom was still sitting at the table, probably expecting me to come back begging for my savings back. I placed the two documents neatly side by side on the counter, my medical file with my brother's name on it, and the life insurance beneficiary change. "I'm leaving, Mom," I said. She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Don't be ridiculous, Lindsay. Where would you go? You have no money. Your account is empty. You're being impulsive. I'm going to Emily's first. She doesn't know what you did, but she's going to find out. I'm going to ask for a place to sleep for a few weeks until I figure things out." She pushed her chair back, finally showing some genuine alarm. "You are not going to broadcast our private family business to your friends. You will ruin us. And you will ruin yourself. You will be broke, Lindsay, you will fail." I looked her straight in the eye, my hands flat on the counter. "Maybe I will fail. Maybe I will be broke. But at least I will be broke on my own terms, not yours. You taught me that my life and my struggles are a mark of shame you have to hide. You taught me that my own mother is more worried about what Martha and George think than about my dignity." I paused, pointing to the two documents. You kept me here by paying for the best orthotics so I could walk with minimal limp, but then you took away the money that would have let me walk away from you. You tried to buy my obedience with a future death benefit, but you forgot that I can walk, Mom. I can walk right out the door. I picked up the key to the study desk, threw it onto the counter next to the papers, and turned to leave. You'll be back, Lindsay, she yelled after me, her voice now high-pitched and desperate. You can't make it without us. You'll realize you made a huge mistake when you have to pay rent. I stopped at the front door, my hand on the cold doorknob. Maybe I will, I said, not turning back. But I'd rather limp out that door right now, knowing who I am, than walk perfectly straight in here, knowing I'm a hidden secret. That limp is mine, Mom. The shame is yours. I opened the door and walked out, leaving the 2 documents on the kitchen counter, the evidence of their long game of shame and my sudden, desperate freedom. I have no money, no firm plan, and my leg is already starting to ache from the emotional stress. But for the first time in 25 years, I feel like I'm walking toward my life, not the one they curated. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know it won't be in the shadow of their perfection. The money is gone. The limp is still here. But the shame? That stays with them.